All right, I think we can, we'll go ahead and kick it off just in the interest of everyone's time. And I think folks will continue to trickle in. So good morning, everybody. And thank you so much for joining us today and making the time to be a part of this briefing. I'm very excited to have everybody here today for what I expect to be the first of a series of briefings for our membership from the San Francisco County Transportation Authority on their congestion pricing study. And I'd like to start by thanking my government affairs chairs, Shana Eskew and Rebecca Aguilar, as well as the members of our board. We've been having a lot of conversations about this study, and we thought the best thing to do would be to open it up to our membership in order to facilitate a robust discussion about our thoughts, our comments, our concerns related to the program. And in the interest of doing so, I'm very happy that we have Rachel Hyatt, who is the Deputy Director for Planning, Assistant Deputy Director for Planning at SFCTA, and Brittany Chan as well from SFCTA, who are going to start by giving us a brief update of the study, and then we'll open it up to questions and concerns and sort of more of a discussion about everything we want to know. So with that, Rachel, thank you so much for joining us, and I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, David and John, and everyone for having us today. We really appreciate you taking the time. And as David mentioned, I'm grateful that he suggested we actually have a series of conversations with your membership. Are you seeing my slides? Is it the slide view? Okay, great. Well, so our agency, I'm Assistant Deputy for Planning at SFCTA, San Francisco County Transportation Authority. We are governed by the Board of Supervisors in their role. It's all 11 members in their role as Transportation Authority Commissioners. And it's the responsibility for long-range planning and congestion management that it was under that role and responsibility that they asked us in pre-pandemic times, 2019, to study congestion pricing. And we were at record levels of congestion in 2019. We had surpassed, pre-2008, the levels prior to the last recession. And this time around, it was not just growth in jobs and housing, but it was also ride hails, growth in ride hails that brought us to those levels. We obviously now, congestion has completely changed, and there are many uncertainties about how travel patterns will look. Looking at next year, 5 years from now, our board, we did go back to them and ask for guidance on how to proceed after shelter in place happened, and we knew that there were going to be a lot of changes, and congestion pricing was no longer something that was needed now. And they did ask us to continue with this study and seek to complete it for a few reasons. One, just this type of a policy takes years to develop. If the board wishes to continue developing it after this stage, so it's a 5-year time frame at the soonest. And then secondly, it also, the policy development can't be rushed itself, because the devil's in the details, as they say, and we know that there needs to be a lot of iteration and conversation, and there's many stakeholders, so it just is something that takes a lot of time and can't be rushed. So we do expect congestion to return in some way in the future, but there are many uncertainties about when and what it looks like and how it's different. So we also, in our congestion management agency role, do track how congestion is returning, and maybe Brittany could share the link to the COVID congestion tracker that we have on our website, where we are continuously collecting new travel pattern information and publishing it there. Congestion being the main reason to that our board wanted us to look at congestion pricing, with the goal of managing congestion. But there are other parts of San Francisco, other departments within the city that have pointed to congestion pricing as a strategy that we need to look at to try to meet some of our city's ambitious goals. In particular, Vision Zero, congestion pricing is identified in our city's Vision Zero action strategy, as well as our city's climate action plan. The transportation is the one sector that's going in the wrong direction when it comes to meeting our ambitious greenhouse gas reduction goals. For the managing congestion primary goal, though, it's about looking at congested parts of the network and congested times of day and seeking to use that limited finite road space as efficiently as possible to move the number of people that we need to move. So we're not talking about weekends or evenings or even middays, actually, based on congestion patterns pre-pandemic. It's really just the 3 or so, at least pre-pandemic it was, in the AM and the PM during the weekdays. Other performance metrics, though, that we would track in addition to reductions in delays and improvements in trip reliability are the safety of our streets. So the high injury network, the 13% of streets where we have 75% of the fatal and serious injury collisions, are also the streets that have the most congested traffic. And the picture looks similar for pollution. Pre-pandemic, and we know that we will need to look at this information again as shelter-in-place lifts and travel restrictions are lifted, or as destinations open back up, to understand how the picture changes. But pre-pandemic, the people traveling downtown during the rush hour weekdays were primarily in the highest income category. There were people, of course, of all incomes traveling during, the peaks. This is the morning peak. And among low-income folks, they're mostly traveling on the bus, on transit, or walking. Impacted by congestion more so than contributing to it. But there were about these 13% of travelers during the peak times that were low-income folks driving their personal vehicles. Our challenge is to design a policy that doesn't increase costs for these folks and is, progressive in its design. We knew, at least pre-pandemic, that we couldn't just solve the San Francisco congestion problem by restricting regional traffic because most of the vehicle trip making that was happening downtown was, started somewhere in San Francisco, whether it started as a trip downtown itself or from a different neighborhood in San Francisco. This figure does include ride-hail trips that could be a driver coming in from a different county in the morning and then who makes dozens of trips, over the course of the day. We have performance metrics. The equity performance metrics include the cost. So household expenses on transportation is something that we're looking at across all income categories or all income bands to understand how changes in household travel expenses would change. Also, the distribution of the program benefits and costs under congestion and just trip performance. We would measure by reliability of trips, by reduced delays, but also wanting to design a program that maintains the same number of people coming to the zone, to downtown. So the same number of people, but just shifts about 15% of vehicle trip making either to a different time of day or to a different mode of transportation. Through the outreach we've done so far, we've heard almost every perspective that there is, probably from very serious concerns to strong support and the whole perspective in between. The common concerns we hear are about affordability and equity, whether a program could really be designed in a progressive way that didn't increase costs for low-income people, whether transit, and especially I think knowing that we need to get transit back to where it was pre-pandemic, and that there will be a lag in recovering our transit plans. Will transit serve as a and be able to be that quality alternative for a sufficient enough number of people, and business effects, so especially in light of the devastation that the pandemic has had on downtown businesses. Congestion pricing could be a barrier to recovery rather than something that helps, and that's not what the outcome that we or our board want, and we realize that congestion pricing is not an appropriate policy to have in place right now at a time like this, when we're in a recession, when we don't have the vaccination, when our job unemployment rates are high. It's a policy for the future if congestion becomes a problem again, when it becomes a problem again, but and where, when and where, I guess, however that turns out. This is the boundary that we are working with right now, although we are continuing to analyze the questions that we get from folks about the zone, such as, does Mission Bay contribute the same amount of congestion, in the near term that downtown does? That's something we're looking at. We know that it's a growing area and it's projected to have a lot of the growth in vehicle trip making, as well as questions about the northern boundary. Would Broadway be a better northern boundary? That's also something we're looking at. This is a lot, but so it's also, I could absolutely make all of these things available to David if you want to reference them at some later point, but this is a summary of the policy options that we're doing sort of more deep dive on analytically. The sort of different options are in the columns 1, 2, and 3, different options, and some of the policy features, sort of should do's or should do's are in the rows. And some things to point out are that each of them has a means-based structure to the fee, so that the low-income people, very low-income people, are exempt completely from it, and that other travelers who are at or below area median income are discounted, so that it's only folks who are 120%, who are above area median income would be really subject to a congestion fee in its full amount. But there are other, so that's a core, I guess, finding that it would be required to design it progressively. Some other considerations, though, that we are looking at include discounts for zone residents or bridge toll payers of any income, so including high-income folks who may live in the zone, people with disabilities in general, regardless of their income. Some other things that we recommend are a cap on the daily number of trips that would ever be subject to a congestion fee. We we know it's not needed for the program to be affected, or it seems from our analysis that the program doesn't need to, it will be effective with providing that cap to ensure that, you know, there's a max charge that would ever happen for a traveler. Ride hails, because they disproportionately contribute to congestion, we also recommend that the fee apply differently to them per trip rather than crossing in. That's another thing that I should clarify. The first two scenarios here, it's just a fee that applies inbound. What else? Oh, only during peak periods, only during AM and PM rush hours on the weekdays. The last, maybe two more things to share before we go on to your question. One is that we are taking into account in our analysis the impacts that COVID has had on travel patterns, and that we expect will continue to have for, you know, the coming years, even on travel patterns. We are looking also at what that range of different travel changes might be, given how differently San Francisco travel responded after the last two recessions. I'm sure all of you experienced the difference between the 2000 recession, which was recovery, which was very slow and very lagging, and in fact, we hadn't even gotten back up to the same number of jobs pre-2000 when the 2008 recession happened. But then the recovery from that one was very different from the previous, in that it was a lot faster, at least as far as jobs and population to recover. So there is a lot of uncertainty, I guess, we recognize about how recovery could look this time around, and we're trying to, well, we're looking at the bookends, but also just a reasonable possible middle ground for how jobs and population might recover. We're also incorporating other factors like work from home and the very likelihood that, you know, we've seen the announcements of employers about their working from home policies, and we know there's still a lot more decision-making among employers about that, but we assume that a significant amount of work from home will continue, and that will reduce trip making, absolutely. And we recognize that, and we also recognize that it's going to take a while for transit to get back to the service levels that we had pre-pandemic, or even get back to making the improvements that were slated pre-pandemic. So we recognize that it'll be years, you know, 5 years at a minimum, before congestion might be at a place where congestion pricing would be needed to manage it. Our study will continue through the end of the year, and outreach along with that. And so we're grateful to David for suggesting that we continue this conversation as we continue our work through the end of the year. And the last thing to make sure everyone knows is that, you know, congestion pricing piloting or implementation requires state legislation to authorize it. So we couldn't implement a pricing program in San Francisco without state legislation being passed through the legislature with the governor's signature. So a lot of future steps that would be required if our board wants to continue developing a policy after December. So thank you very much for having us. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Rachel. That was a really great presentation. And again, thank you both, Rachel and Brittany, for joining us today. So now, folks, what I want to do is open it up to questions, comments, concerns. And we can do this a number of ways. So if you would like to ask the question yourself, feel free to just raise your hand, either physically like this or with the Zoom function, and I'll call on you. If you'd rather shoot your question to the group in the Q&A on the chat, or just to me on the chat, feel free to do it that way as well. And, you know, we're really just looking to have a robust discussion here what comes to your mind? What are concerns that you have? How can we help shape this study in a way that we think is going to be effective to address our concerns? So with that, I'll open it up, and I see Bonnie's hand right away. So Bonnie.
Thank you. And Rachel, I want to thank you again for this presentation. I admit I have seen this a couple of times, and I keep up to speed with going on your website and up to date on that. One item which I continue to be a little confused about or unsure about is with the fees that you're looking to collect. What are those fees going to be used for?
Yeah, thank you. And I should have probably included a slide to address that. I apologize. So that is part of our outreach and our policy discussion right now, and would be part of our recommendations to make some guidelines around how revenues should be used. Some of the things we've heard are, number one, that revenues have to be used to improve access to downtown and access within downtown. So they need to be related to improving the ability to get downtown and providing an alternative to driving. And so we've heard, put the revenues towards transit crowding and reducing transit crowding. So we do think we would need to do that anyway, because there would be some shift of travelers to transit, and we need to add transit service to other all modes. So including BART or Caltrain regional transit, we would need to consider. We've also heard consider other types of travel challenges. The school trip is one we've heard about a lot, and that the school district doesn't really provide hardly anything in the way of transportation, and so that school transportation is something that would be useful. We've also heard just use the revenues to help enhance like safety and security with walking downtown, or so a whole variety of things. And we will, in our report out to our board, we're going to share the whole range of input that we've heard about how the revenue should be used, and then some principles. I think that in any kind of authorizing legislation which would be required, there would need to be some kind of guidance in there about accountability for the revenues.
And speaking on that, Rachel, I know you sort of touched on all of the processes that would have to happen for this to get implemented. But could you just dive a little bit more into, we had a question that was, when do you see this being implemented? If you could just sort of walk us through what has to happen once you finish the study at the local level, and then everything at the state and potentially federal level as well.
Mm-hmm. So this is a conceptual planning level analysis that we're doing. And so things that would have to happen, after December when this study is done, would include more detailed design work, because the types of recommendations that we would make would be at a very high level, conceptual, and so there would need to be more detail and sort of business rule development put on them, which would require more design and iteration and outreach. There would also have to be environmental analysis. So the California Environmental Quality Act analysis and approvals. There would need to be state legislation. So the California Assembly and State Senate would need to pass authorizing legislation. The governor would need to sign it. And then there would need to be, I guess, all of the other types of local approvals that would need to happen that would follow from that. I mean, we would need our, there's multiple local approvals that would need to have to happen. I don't think I could name them all actually right now. But it's a 5-year process to go through all of those steps. So that's the soonest that we think that those steps could all be accomplished. But the other thing is that, we'd only want to put it in place if it was needed. So if, 5 years from now, there's still no congestion, then then it's not needed.
Great. Anybody else? I have a couple in the queue here, but did anyone want to ask one themselves? Okay, so we'll go to another question that I got was if you could just speak a little more generically to the pricing levels. It looked like some of those numbers have changed a little bit since the beginning of the study. And then sort of on that topic too, sort of what is the basis of how you came up with those levels and sort of why they're that way?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they have changed, and they've changed because of the pandemic. So when we started off, we were looking at, and we were starting in an existing condition of 2019 with 300,000, vehicle trips happening downtown per day, and needing to, we estimated that we would need to reduce that by about 15% to get the type of performance improvements in trip, delays, reliability, et cetera, that would be effective. And so we identified the initial price levels based on what we project the price signal would be needed to achieve that 15% reduction over 2019 levels. Well, we're not at 2019 levels anymore. So now we're looking at, well, what might a future 2025 look like? What might a future 2030 look like? And adjusting the price based on, well, if there's congestion in, 2025, what would the price need to be to maintain the system at, the trip reliability, et cetera, that we'd be wanting to achieve. So that's why, they're a lot lower.
Great. Yeah, and actually, on that point, a big concern that I hear a lot is when we talk about congestion pricing and the efficacy of the program, we talk about cities like London who have implemented it. And one concern I hear from a lot of folks is that while I'm sure we all believe San Francisco is a world-class city, we don't quite have that world-class transit system yet to be able to provide sort of the robust level of service to provide the alternatives to driving. And so I guess my question is sort of what has to happen first? Would we have to implement the program and then rely on that revenue to increase service, or do you envision that there would have to be sort of other outside investments in increasing service levels to be able to provide the alternatives that would be able to incentivize people not to drive in?
That latter. And so we do believe that, and this is true of the other cities that have done this too, not just London, but also Stockholm and other cities have increased transit service. And in particular, in both those cases, it was the bus service. Like London didn't increase tube service on their day one because they couldn't. It was already maxed. They were trying to improve their bus service, and that's where they put a lot of resources into increasing their bus service. Same with Stockholm, and we think we would need to do the same here from day one. And so that would look like getting a federal grant. So a few years ago, when New York was considering congestion pricing for their first time around, they actually got a really significant federal, they would have gotten, if they had continued on with it, or a federal infusion to ramp up significantly their transit service on their day one. And we think the same thing would need to happen here. Great.
Yeah, and so another question we have is, a lot of sort of our industry sees, during the day, San Francisco's sort of population doubles, right? Before the pandemic, at least, in terms of folks coming in from all around the Bay Area to commute. And I wonder, when we talk about, I know that, one of these scenarios considers exemptions or partial exemptions for people who pay bridge tolls. And one concern we hear a lot is that cost for folks who are already maybe paying, a bridge toll, or in some cases 2 bridge tolls, folks who are coming in from, Vallejo and go over 2 bridges, plus parking and gas. They're looking at, potentially $50 to $60 a day overall in terms of what they're paying to commute. And that is, that adds up to, upwards of $14,000 a year, which is, you have to be making a lot of money for that to be insignificant. So what I wonder is, it looks like most of the trips that we're trying to reduce are within the city. Has there been any thought, or where do you think there'll be sort of more room for thought in terms of exemptions from folks who are coming either from the East Bay or Marin, especially as it relates to, bridge tolls?
Yeah, that's true. We are looking at a discount a discount to the congestion fee for people who have paid a bridge toll as part of their journey, just in recognition of what the issue you just described. And we will continue to look at that and report out. What our analysis will show basically is what it takes to provide that. So what the trade-offs are with providing that discount, as well as providing, the other types of discounts that we're looking at, and how other parts of the program would need to change to allow those discounts to happen and still have an effective program. So what we're going to be seeking to do is help our board and everyone else understand what's involved as a trade-off with each of those discount options. Oh, I think.
Sorry, I was on mute. So another question we got was, can you speak about the need for more parking lots in the perimeter of the zone and how this would impact delivery trucks?
Yeah, good point. Well, so helping to support, in commuting through a whole variety of ways is something that we recognize the need for. Stockholm, for instance, their program was structured, or their border is structured in a way where they have provided more park and ride setups, around the perimeter, with express bus, increased as part of that. And so that's something that they did and got a lot of usage from that. So more express bus, where people might start their journey elsewhere, but then ultimately take an express bus in. That's something that, we can look at. I think parking management of parking, around the zone is something that would be important to look at. And actually, Mari, I should have already recognized my colleague Mari Hunter, who's here from SFMTA, who works on parking issues. So yes, I recognize the question. I mean, it's a good point that we would need to consider parking management around the zone so that, unintended consequences are addressed, and also that things like express bus, from folks who may have like park and ride from San Mateo or someplace, is a good thing to think about. And then you had a question about deliveries. So for deliveries, one of the reasons we recommend the cap is for delivery purposes, so that you're not continuing to rack up charge and charge and charge and charge, but there's a finite amount that would ever accrue.
Yeah, that's good to hear, because as someone just mentioned in the chat, I think, one concern, especially as sort of building managers, is that, the cost of contractors entering the city, and for, expecting materials, folks with materials to take public transit or alternatives, that's going to drive up the cost of contracting and construction related repairs, et cetera. So certainly something we're interested in from the BOMA perspective.
Yeah, right. Understood. And I should make sure everyone knows that the means-based discounts we're proposing would apply, not just to San Francisco residents, but anyone in the Bay Area who gets a fast track, or who can get a fast track. So if you are below area median income and you, want to take advantage of the discount that you would be eligible for, as long as you are eligible to get a fast track, then you could get that discount too.
And actually, that's a sort of a great segue. I think it'd be great if you talked a little bit to folks just about, and I know no one really knows yet, but about how this might work in terms of the technology of capturing folks in entering the zone, et cetera, determining who's eligible for discounts. I think it's an interesting discussion topic.
Mm-hmm. Technology-wise, it works like the Golden Gate Bridge. It would work like the Golden Gate Bridge, where there's no toll booths. You have a fast track device, and that's how you interface when you cross the cordon. It's just like crossing the bridge toll, and then for folks who don't have a fast track, there's a license plate backup system. So for folks who don't have a fast track, you can pay through your license plate. And for getting the discount, what you would do is when you sign up to get your fast track account, or if you already have a fast track, you go back to the fast track customer service and say, okay, here's my proof of income to have my account be the discounted account.
And thank you again, Rachel, for taking the time. A few more questions here. One is about traffic patterns. Is there any sort of thought that if we were to implement some sort of program, people would drive in during alternative hours to avoid having to pay fees and resulting in sort of congestion at odd hours of the day?
Yeah, well, so we do think that there would be a shift of some people to other hours to avoid paying it. And that's kind of by design. We're wanting to spread the peak, if you will. We're hoping to see, people who are able to make their trip, at a different time of day to do that. And we're going to be we're looking now in our analysis about, well, what might the magnitude of that be? And would it cause unintended congestion or unintended diversions, and what might that look like? So that's something, we haven't completed that analysis yet, but in one of our future meetings, we'll be able to report on what we're projecting as far as, diversions or shifting.
Absolutely. Garth, it looked like you maybe raised your hand.
Yes, just one more question about people that are on or near the borderline. I live on Potrero Hill. I'm, a block and a half from the border. So if I go to the grocery store during peak hours, it's just like going downtown?
Well, one of the things we did with Potrero is we've moved the border up to Division to try to not split neighborhoods. We're trying to not, define the border so that we're, not having it cut through neighborhoods where, if you're wanting to just go to 18th Street and Potrero as the neighborhood sort of center, that's not a dividing line.
That's good news. But again, I mean, when somebody is, if you're, within a few blocks either side of the cordon, wherever it is, if your pharmacy is on one side and you're on the other, have you tripped the cordon if you go across it at the wrong time of day? Is that the way this works?
You would. Yeah, I mean, you would if you're driving during the peak. I mean, of course, if it's a few blocks and you're just walking there, then it doesn't.
Understood.
Yeah.
So some other questions. Can you speak to some of the other cities that are successfully utilizing congestion pricing? I know you talked about London, but sort of, where are we looking for inspiration?
Well, so some of the other cities, London is the most well-known one. I think Stockholm's program started in 2006. And well, their program started as a pilot that was in place for 6 months, and then they stopped it and put it to a vote of their voters in a referendum. And their voters actually decided to keep it, which is interesting. And so they've had it since then. And yeah, they mostly invested in their bus network. London also, one of the purposes for them, air quality was a purpose, but also congestion was a problem, and they weren't able to increase their tube capacity in a immediate time frame, enough to accommodate and see improvements. So they were trying to improve the performance of their bus network, and they really did get a lot of improvement in their bus network, which is what they focused on. New York is going to be the first North American city to use cordon pricing. Their program is expected to launch next year. That's what what I understand from folks from New York. They're moving ahead with it, and their key focus is going to be to improve their subway system. Yeah, and there are other cities that have, Singapore has a system, Milan, Oslo, but in every place it's different. That's something else I would say, is that the policies differ really significantly from city to city, and we would expect the same thing here. Like a San Francisco version is not going to look like a London version.
Absolutely. And I apologize for jumping around. Some clarification questions on so we talked about the technology to capture entering the zone. Was there a cost estimate on that? And then we sort of spoke to, my belief is that the sort of income data comes from filing with the DMV. Is that correct?
So yes, so first question, there would be a cost to install the equipment, the reader and equipment that reads the fast track or the license plate. And that would cost about $125 million as the upfront cost to do that. And it would need to be either paid with a federal grant or repaid, financed by the future revenues. And then as far as income data, so to qualify for your discount, it's like with the discounted Muni Lifeline Pass, there's a variety of different proofs of income, proofs of eligibility that you can show. And I think we would model, after those same programs, where you can either show a tax return or you can show Medi-Cal. There's a variety of other, if you are already signed up for a discount program with the state or locally, you can just show that, and that would also serve as your proof.
And let's see, anything else? So one other sort of question that we've gotten, and I spoke a little to this about bridge tolls, but in terms of sort of regional connectivity and sort of filling the gaps for some of those folks, maybe in Marin County or parts of the East Bay, not near BART, do you envision, and I know that this will be studied in the future, stuff like enhancement of options to get to, mass transit, but also things like maybe potential discounts for folks who carpool. I know a lot of our members are members of the Transit Management Association of San Francisco. Sort of any other potential programs like that?
We can look at things of interest to, so some of the things I'm hearing are of interest would be supporting regional travel alternatives, which, we agree that we would need to not just limit to local transit, but also look at how regional transit would be needed to be supported to be a good alternative. And then carpool discounts. I mean, I think there's kind of naturally a built-in discount for folks who carpool because you can split it, among yourself.
Absolutely, that's a great point. Again, I think just sort of to wrap things up here, one more time, if you could reiterate to folks, you're about to start your new round of outreach in the summer, and we're looking at 3 to 5 years here in terms of rolling out a plan and everything. So if you could just recap that, and then we'll close it out by letting folks know when the next opportunity is going to be.
Yes, thank you. So we are looking to have new information about trade-offs among these options to share and get feedback on starting in June, and then going through the summer. And the study itself will continue through the end of the year. It's the end of the year when we would bring recommendations to our board. And then if the board wants to continue analyzing or developing a policy after that point, it would be, I think 3 years is even definitely a minimum. I think it's more like 5 years is really what it would take. And so there's a number of steps, including state legislation and the governor's signature that would need to happen. So there would be a lot of public process to continue on. And we do look forward to actually coming back and revisiting with you all again before we bring recommendations.
Great. Well, thank you so much again, Rachel and Mary and Brittany for joining us today. I think this was a really great start to what I think is going to be a long conversation. And, we're really looking forward to providing our feedback and being a part of the process, and making sure that the final recommendation works for what everyone needs to be able to ultimately achieve the goal of reducing congestion, but at the same time doing so in a way that works. So if anyone doesn't have any more final questions, I think I'll let everyone get back to the rest of their day, but I really appreciate everyone taking the time to join us, and this was a great start.
Great. Thanks, David.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. Appreciate you coming.
Thank you for having us. Appreciate it.